Today we're going to read Walk the World's Rim, Chapter 2. Questions. Okay. Ch.2 took Esteban to hunt cold, stiffened lizards. They dug at rocks and roots until their fingers bled. Esteban moved boulders that Ch.2 would not have tried even if he were a man. When they turned home before dusk, each had 3 large lizards hidden beneath his loincloth. "Half of your family and half for mine," said Esteban. "You mean to share them with me?" To be sure, Ch.2 had hoped some would be given to his parents, but had not dared to ask. It was because of Esteban that they had caught anything at all. He trotted to keep pace with Esteban's long stride. "You will be leaving soon." Esteban glanced down at him, but said nothing. "We will not share many more fires," Ch.2 tried again. He grinned at Esteban's rumbling laughter. "Very well, little one. Bring your share to cook with ours, though I don't know why you hold our friendship so highly." Ch.2 did not consider the 3 senior friends, especially the disagreeable Dorantes. Don Castillo was gentle and a great healer, but he was weak, and this was no country for a weakling. Remember, I'm not great with the pronunciations. I forgot to say that in the beginning. So here's a word. Cabeza de vaca commanded respect, but that was not friendship. Only Esteban had given that. It was Esteban that Ch.2 would miss, but today it was Cabeza de vaca with whom he must speak. And the best time to speak great thoughts was after one had eaten well. So as well as one could eat at the end of a hard winter. He stopped briefly at his father's hut, not even waiting to bask in his mother's pleasure at the game he brought. The sight of hungry villagers gave him a feeling of guilt until he remembered how much they owed the 3 Spaniards. A few lizards would not begin to pay for what they'd done this winter at the Avivars. As he helped prepare the meal in Esteban's hut, Ch.2 took a deep breath and asked again about the country of many feasts toward which the men from the sun were struggling. Esteban laughed. "Are you back to that again, little one? It's been so long that I thought you'd forgotten it." "I have not forgotten. There is much I wish to know." "Then ask. You will answer?" "To be sure. But let's have no talk of food when we are preparing a feast." Ch.2 dropped the questions he'd been going to ask and selected one that had bothered him all winter, but he hadn't dared ask before. "Do you really come from the land where the sun rises?" That was not the direction in which the seniors planned to travel. Surely they would want to return to the land from which they'd come. Esteban's toothy grin disappeared. He looked beyond the fire into the shadowed corners of the hut. "To be sure," he said at last. "I come from a land as near the place where the sun rises as you can travel from here." "And is that why you are black, from being burned by the sun?" "No, little one. I come from a land where all men are black. Some are blacker than I." "I cannot believe it." The grin returned. "And I cannot believe that you or any of your people, but you are here to be sure." Ch.2 pondered a moment. "The 3 seniors are white. How did they come to be in your land?" "I was taken to their land, Spain. It is near mine." "But then what is this Mexico they say is toward the sun setting and then south?" "It is hard to explain, little one." Ch.2 hugged his legs to his chest and waited. Esteban grinned at him and shook his head. "I see that I must explain. It makes no difference that you will not understand. Spain, oceans, ships, and islands were now familiar through Esteban's stories. Though he did not understand, Chaco no longer worried over them. The great warrior Cortez, in his conquest of the Aztecs, was understandable. Chaco had seen battles, but the city of Mexico and the kind of fighting done there astounded him. To think that such a great thing had happened when he was toddling around the village as a tiny child, and his people had known nothing of it. But Esteban was right. He did not understand at all. If, as you say, the Spaniards already had a perfectly good land, why did they want another? By the beard of the prophet, is there no end to your questions? Chaco ducked his head. But you said you would answer. And so I will, Esteban chuckled. But it would be easier to tuck you under my arm and carry you to Mexico to see for yourself. If only Esteban could do just that. Cabeza de Vaca crept into the hut with something bundled in front flap of his loincloth. I took Durantes to dig roots. Most I give to that widow with 3 children, but I saved enough for some sort of stew. Put them aside for tomorrow, said Esteban. Tonight we have meat. The Spaniard peered at the lizards roasting over the coals. Don't tell me. Let me think it's quail. I'll enjoy it more. The other 2 Spaniards crowded into the small hut. Castillo carried the rosary he'd made of brown and gray seeds. He sat in the shadows, fingering the seeds and whispering prayers. Durantes pushed up to the fire and rubbed his hands together in the warmth. He sniffed the food. What's that? Don't ask, warned Cabeza de Vaca. The boy, bring it. Esteban caught them, said Chaco. Durantes rubbed his hands tighter. Esteban, eh? Best investment I ever made. Esteban divided the meat into small flank baskets. Then he passed them around. He added some of his own share to Castillo's. Here, said Durantes. None of that, Esteban. You eat your whole share. You're getting weak as it is. Chaco grinned, remembering the boulders Esteban had moved that day. He tried to catch his friend's eyes, but Esteban scowled down at his food as though Durantes' concern annoyed him. The men bowed their heads to speak with their god. Chaco lowered his, too, but watched out of the corner of his eye. When they touched fingers to forehead, chest, and shoulders, he imitated the gesture. Cabeza de Vaca saw him and smiled. How does the Spaniard, Chaco? It goes well. And Esteban has been teaching you other things as well, I see. I'm surprised. It's too bad we haven't a priest here to continue the training. Priest? Chaco looked at Esteban for an explanation. Esteban glanced at the Spaniards. A medicine man, he replied in Avivar. Yeah, okay. But there aren't the senor's medicine men? Chaco asked in the same tongue. No. Cabeza de Vaca asked for a translation. He's asking about priests. The Spaniard smiled. One day a priest will come here and build a church. What is a church? Esteban grinned, but let Cabeza de Vaca answer. It is the house of God. That explained many things. At last, Chaco understood why the seniors were so hungry and had no warm deerskins, and why their God had not rescued them from the coast tribes. Their God lived in a hut in Mexico. It was there that his strength was greatest. Here it was weak, and so the seniors could only ask him to heal. It was the same as carrying an ember in a clay pot instead of a large fire from which the ember had come. He glanced around. Would a god live in a hut like this? This is the largest of our huts, yet it seems small for a god. Durantes laughed. The church in Mexico is so large you could put 3 of your villages in it. Chaco's eyes widened. Who wove such big mats? How are they held up? The church isn't made of mats. It's built of stone. Durante's tone was scornful, but Chaco didn't notice. He was lost in wonder and amazement. In his mind, he pictured a small land closed off from the earth by a small sky. Inside this sky-topped cave was a plain covered with villages. Did it have its own sun and moon? It must. How else would there be light? Truly, this God must be stronger than any of Ares knew, strong enough to overcome the spirit of misfortune that plagued his people. I should like to see this church and learn more of your God. Then why not come with us, said Cabeza de Vaca. The journey is too long and harsh. He's only a boy, said Esteban. He's approaching manhood. Besides, he knows Spanish well and has already learned something of Christianity. I think his education should continue. He's too young, repeated Esteban. Chaco stared from one to the other. What was the matter with Esteban? Didn't he want Chaco along? Esteban's next words removed all doubts of his friend's affection. His father is a headman. Chaco is his only son. He will not let Chaco leave the village. But I think he will. How could he refuse when he heard of these wonders? If he agrees, may I go? He'll be a burden to us, another useless mouth to feed. Durantes glared at the praying Castillo. Esteban scowled angrily at the Spaniards, grumbling. A boy like Chaco is never a burden. What could he do? He knows how to live in this country. He's also quick with languages. He would make an interpreter if something should happen to me. Nothing will happen to you, shouted Durantes. Not unless I want it to. The air in the hut was alive and threatening, like that before a thunderstorm. Chaco had felt the same atmosphere when quarreling headmen visited his father. He backed toward the deerskin. Someone murmured, "Go with God," as he scurried through the doorway into a clean, friendly night. The relief of having escaped some unknown danger flowed over him. It was always like this when Esteban and Durantes were together. As always, he wondered why, but did not dwell long on the mystery. He had a larger problem, persuading his father to let him accompany the seniors to Mexico. It was far easier than he'd thought. He told of the little world their God had created inside a cave with a small sun and moon to light and guide it. His father nodded. In the beginning, our people came from out of the earth. Perhaps that is the place from which they came. Then it would be well for me to return there. I do not know. Chaco put forth his last argument. Someday I will be headman of our village. If there is a God strong enough to overpower the spirit of misfortune, it would be well for me to know of him. That is true. His father looked long into the fire. Then he said, I will study the signs. Chaco lay on his sleeping mat, watching his father's back. From time to time, the man's arms jerked upward, tossing the contents of his medicine bag on a flat basket. Then he leaned over and peered at the design before tossing again. Chaco knew better than to try to sneak a look at the objects on the basket or to ask the mystery of the ritual. Each man had to discover his own medicine and the way to invoke its power. He only hoped the spirit of misfortune would not interfere. He turned his head toward his left shoulder, changed his mind, and made the sign of the seniors instead. Now was as good a time as any to begin. Then he turned over on a sleeping mat and let the spirits, good and bad, struggle with the contents of his father's medicine pouch. In the morning, he needed only one look at his father's sad eyes to know which had won. He raced off to give Esteban the good news. After that came anxious days of waiting, filled only by the desperate search for an ever-dwelling source of food. The Spaniards had already decided to travel north. Mexico was to the southwest, but they feared the cruel coastal tribes and considered it safer to travel northwest until far beyond their former captors' reach. Besides, Chaco had repeated what he knew of the buffalo. Food might be more plentiful to the north, and if the Avares were an example, the tribes were certainly friendlier. The only question was when to leave. The cactus fruit was turning color. Cabeza de Vaca announced, "We'll have food for our journey now. We will leave." Chaco began to explain that the color meant nothing. It would be another moon before the fruit was ripe enough to eat. But he thought better of it. Food would be no harder to find farther north than it would be this month in the village. Also, if they delayed until food was plentiful, his father might decide there was no need for a new god and change his mind about letting Chaco go. An empty stomach had had much to do with his father's decision. Chaco slung his quiver over his shoulder, picked up his bow and stone axe, and went to join the men from the sun in the center of the village. Esteban waited for him. He drew Chaco to one side. "You should not go, little one." "I must. My father wishes me to learn of this new God." "But it is not a new God. Listen to me, little one. God, Allah, Earth, Maker, Spirit of good things, it is all the same, only the name is different. The spirit of misfortune and the spirit of good things are not the same." Esteban sighed. "Chaco, these are your people. This is your land. Stay here with those who care for you. Stay with the life you know. No land is like the land of your birth. No people like your own." "That is true," said Chaco bitterly. "What other place could be like this?" Together they turned and looked over the village of reed mat shacks. Dirt piled around the north walls in the useless attempt to keep out the cold winter winds. Every bone could be counted in the naked chests of the people moving about in the weak sunshine. Children dug for roots. 2 men fought over the carcass of a wood rat. "Aye, aye," breathed Esteban. "One forgets, but this is even worse than what I remember of." He interrupted himself to land a hearty slap on Chaco's shoulder. The boy sprawled on the ground. "1,000 pardons, Chaco." Esteban picked him up as easily as he would roll of straw mats, and stood him upright. "Durantes has said so often I am weak that I am beginning to believe him. Are you hurt?" Chaco shook his head. "Then come. We're off to Mexico. The feasts and the bullfights." The villagers walked along with the travelers, begging them to stay and heal their sick, but the Spaniards were determined to go on. When the escort turned back, Chaco said farewell to his parents. On his chest, his father wore a scalloped shell with mysterious symbols scratched on its smooth inner surface. The headman lifted the thong and placed it around Chaco's neck. "It will protect you, my son." Chaco embraced him. Then his mother looked long into his eyes. When she embraced him, her face was wet with tears. Chaco turned quickly away before he too could weep and change his mind. Determinedly, he trotted after Esteban, not looking back at the only home he had ever known. Back there was only famine. Ahead lay Mexico with all its mysteries and the promise of a full stomach.